So welcome back to the third and final part of our performance of An Inspector Calls. And so we left off at the end of Act 2 with the dramatic revelation that Eric had got Eva Smith, Daisy Renton, whatever her name is, pregnant, and Mrs. Birling had at length talked about how this young man should be held to account. So the final link in the chain of events is going to be unveiled, and then we'll see how the different characters react. So Act 3, exactly as at the end of Act 2, Eric is standing just inside the room and the others are staring at him.
You know, don't you?
Yes, we know.
Eric, I can't believe it. There must be some mistake. You don't know what we've been saying.
It's a good job for him he doesn't, isn't it?
Why?
Because Mother's been blaming everything on the young man who got this girl into trouble and saying he shouldn't escape and should be made an example of.
That's enough, Sheila.
You haven't made it easy for me, have you, Mother?
But I didn't know it was you. I never dreamt. Besides, you're not the type. You don't get drunk.
Of course he does. I told you he did.
You told her. Why, you little sneak.
No, that's not fair, Eric. I could have told her months ago, but of course I didn't. I only told her tonight because I knew everything was coming out. It was simply bound to come out tonight. So I thought she might as well know in advance. Don't forget, I've already been through it.
Sheila, I simply don't understand your attitude.
Neither do I. If you'd had any sense of loyalty.
Just a minute, Mr. Birling. There'll be plenty of time when I've gone for you all to adjust your family relationships. But now I must hear what your son has to tell me. And I'll be obliged if you'll let us get on without any further interruptions. Now then.
Could I have a drink first?
No.
Yes. I know he's your son and this is your house, but look at him. He needs a drink now just to see him through.
All right, go on.
Eric goes for a whiskey. His whole manner of handling the decanter and then the drink shows his familiarity with quick, heavy drinking. The others watch him narrowly.
I understand a lot of things now I didn't understand before.
Don't start on that. I want to get on. When did you first meet this girl?
One night, last November.
Where did you meet her?
In the Palace Bar. I'd been there an hour or so with 2 or 3 chaps. I was a bit squiffy.
And what happened then?
I began talking to her and stood, had a few drinks. I was rather far gone by the time we had to go.
Was she drunk too?
She told me afterwards that she was a bit, chiefly because she'd not had much to eat that day.
Why had she gone there?
She wasn't the usual sort, but, well, I suppose she didn't know what to do. There was some woman who wanted her to go there. I never quite understood about that.
You went with her to her lodgings that night?
Yes, I did, it seems. Not very clear about it, but afterwards she told me she didn't want me to go in. But well, I was in that state when a chap easily turns nasty, and I threatened to make a row.
So she let you in?
Yes, and that's when it happened. I didn't even remember. That's the hellish thing. Oh my God, how stupid it is all this.
Oh, Eric, how could you?
Sheila, take your mother along to the drawing room.
But I want to.
You heard what I said. Go on, Sybil.
When did you meet her again?
About a fortnight afterwards.
By appointment?
No. And I couldn't remember her name or where she lived. It was all very vague. So I happened to see her again at the Palace Bar.
More drinks?
Yes. At that time, I wasn't so bad.
But you took her home again?
Yes. And this time we talked a bit. She told me something about herself and I talked too. Told her my name and what I did.
And you made love again?
Yes. I wasn't in love with her or anything, but I liked her. She was pretty and a good sport.
So you had to go to bed with her?
Well, I'm old enough to be married, aren't I? And I'm not married. And I hate these fat old tarts round the town. The ones I see some of your respectable friends with.
I don't want any of that talk from you.
I don't want any of it from either of you. Settle it afterwards. Did you arrange to see each other after that?
Yes. And the next time, or the time after that, she told me she thought she was going to have a baby. She wasn't quite sure. And then she was.
And of course, she was very worried about it.
Yes, and so was I. Was in a hell of a state about it.
Did she suggest that you ought to marry her?
No. She didn't want me to marry her. That I didn't love her and all that. In a way, she treated me as if I were a kid. I was nearly as old as she was.
So what did you propose to do?
Well, she hadn't a job and didn't feel like trying again for the one. She had no money left. So I insisted on giving her enough money to keep her going, until she refused to take any more.
How much did you give her altogether?
Suppose about £50 all told.
£50? On top of drinking and going round the town? Where did you get £50 from?
That's my question too.
I got it from the office.
My office?
Yes.
You mean you stole the money?
Not really.
What do you mean, not really?
This isn't my fault.
I'm sorry, Arthur, but I simply couldn't stay in there. I had to know what's happening.
Well, I can tell you what's happening. He's admitted he was responsible for the girl's condition, and now he's telling us he supplied her with the money he stole from the office.
Eric, you stole money?
No, not really. I intended to pay it back.
We've heard that story before. How could you have paid it back?
I'd have managed somehow. I had to have some money.
I don't understand how you could take as much as that out of the office without somebody knowing.
There were some small accounts to collect, and I asked for cash.
Gave the firm's receipts and then kept the money, eh?
Yes.
You must give me a list of those accounts. I've got to cover this up as soon as I can, you damned fool. Why didn't you come to me when you found yourself in this mess?
Because you're not the kind of father a chap could go to when he's in trouble, that's why.
Don't talk to me like that. Your trouble is you've been spoilt.
And my trouble is that I haven't much time. You'll be able to divide the responsibility between you when I've gone. Just one last question, that's all. The girl discovered that this money you were giving her was stolen, didn't she?
Yes. That was the worst of all. She wouldn't take any more, and she didn't want to see me again. Here. But how did you know that? Did she tell you?
No. She told me nothing. I never spoke to her.
She told Mother.
Sheila.
Well, he has to know.
She told you? Did she come here? But then she couldn't have done. She didn't even know I lived here. What happened? Come on. Don't just look like that. Tell me what happened.
I'll tell you. She went to your mother's committee for help after she'd done with you. Your mother refused that help.
Then you killed her. She came to you to protect me and you turned her away. Yes, and you killed her. And then the child she'd had too, my child, your own grandchild, you killed them both. Damn you. Damn you.
No, Eric, please. I didn't know. I didn't understand.
You don't understand anything. You never did. You never even tried. You...
Eric, don't.
Why, you hysterical young fool. Get back or I'll...
Stop. And be quiet for a moment and listen to me. I don't need to know anymore, neither do you. This girl killed herself and died a horrible death. But each of you helped to kill her. Remember that. Never forget it. But then I don't think you ever will. Remember what you did, Mrs. Burling? You turned her away when she most needed help. You refused her even the pitiable little bit of organised charity you had in your power to grant her. Remember what you did.
My God, I'm not likely to forget.
Just used her for the end of a stupid, drunken evening, as if she was an animal, a thing, not a person. No, you won't forget.
I know. I had her turned out of a job. I started it.
You helped, but you didn't start it. You started it. She wanted 25 shillings a week instead of 22 and sixpence. You made her pay a heavy price for that. And now she'll make you pay a heavier price still.
Look, Inspector, I'd give thousands. Yes, thousands.
You're offering the money at the wrong time, Mr. Burling. No, I don't think any of you will forget. Nor that young man, Croft, though he at least had some affection for her and made her happy for a time. Well, Eva Smith's gone. You can't do her any more harm, and you can't do her any good now either. You can't even say, "I'm sorry, Eva Smith."
That's the worst of it.
But just remember this. One Eva Smith has gone, but there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us, with their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering and chance of success, all intertwined with our lives and what we think and say and do. We don't live alone. We are members of one body. We are responsible for each other. And I tell you that the time will come soon when, if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Good night.
He walks straight out, leaving them staring, subdued and wondering. Sheila is still quietly crying. Mrs. Burling has collapsed into a chair. Eric is brooding desperately. Burling, the only active one, hears the front door slam, moves hesitatingly towards the door, stops, looks gloomily at the other three, then pours himself out a drink, which he hastily swallows.
I blame you for this.
I'll bet I am.
Yes, and you don't realise yet all you've done. Most of this is bound to come out. There'll be a public scandal.
Well, I don't care now.
You don't seem to care about anything, but I care. I was almost certain for a knighthood in the next honours list.
Oh, for God's sake. What does it matter now whether they gave you a knighthood or not?
It doesn't matter to you. Apparently nothing matters to you, but it may interest you to know that until every penny of that money you stole is repaid, you'll work for nothing. And there's going to be no more of this drinking round the town and picking up women in the palace bar.
I should think not, Eric. I'm absolutely ashamed of you.
Well, I don't blame you. But don't forget, I'm ashamed of you all as well. Yes, both of you.
Drop that. There's every excuse for what both your mother and I did. It turned out, unfortunately, that's all.
That's all?
Well, what have you to say?
I don't know where to begin.
Then don't begin. Nobody wants you to.
I behaved badly too. I know I did. I'm ashamed of it. But now you're beginning all over again to pretend that nothing much has happened.
Nothing much has happened. Haven't I already said that there'll be a public scandal unless we're lucky? And who here will suffer from that more than I will?
But that's not what I'm talking about. I don't care about that. The point is, you don't seem to have learned anything.
Don't I? Well, you're quite wrong there. I've learned plenty tonight. And you don't want me to tell you what I've learned, I hope. When I look back on tonight, when I think of what I was feeling when the five of us sat down to dinner at that table.
Yes. And do you remember what you said to Gerald and me after dinner when you were feeling so pleased with yourself? You told us that a man has to make his own way, look after himself and mind his own business, and that we weren't taking any notice of these cranks who tell us that everybody has to look after everybody else, as if we were all mixed up together. Do you remember? Yes. And then one of those cranks walked in, the inspector. I didn't notice you told him that it's every man for himself.
Is that when the inspector came? Just after Father had said that?
Yes. What of it?
Now what's the matter, Sheila?
It's queer. Very queer.
I know what you're going to say because I've been wondering myself.
It doesn't much matter now, of course, but was he really a police inspector?
Well, if he wasn't, it matters a devil of a lot. Makes all the difference.
Well, no, it doesn't.
Don't talk rubbish. Of course it does.
Well, it doesn't to me, and it oughtn't to you either.
Don't be childish, Sheila.
I'm not being. If you want to know, it's you two who are being childish, trying not to face the facts.
I won't have that sort of talk. Any more of that, and you'll leave the room.
Oh, that'll be terrible for her, won't it?
I'm going anyhow in a minute or two. But don't you see? If all that's come out tonight is true, then it doesn't much matter who it was who made us confess. And it was true, wasn't it? You turned a girl out of one job, and I had her turned out of another. Gerald kept her at a time when he was supposed to be too busy to see me. Eric, well, we know what Eric did. And Mother hardened her heart and gave her the final push that finished her. That's what's important, not whether a man's a police inspector or not.
He was our police inspector, all right.
Well, that's what I mean, Eric. But if it's any comfort to you, and it wasn't to me, I have an idea, and I had it all along vaguely, that there was something curious about him. He never seemed like an ordinary police inspector.
You're right. I felt it too. Didn't you?
Well, I must say his manner was quite extraordinary, so rude and assertive.
Then look at the way he talked to me, telling me to shut up and so on. He must have known I was next Lord Mayor and a magistrate and so forth. Besides, the way he talked, you remember? I mean, they don't talk like that. I've had dealings with dozens of them.
All right, but it doesn't make any real difference, you know.
Of course it does.
No, Sheila's right, it doesn't.
That's comic. That's it, coming from you. You're the one that makes the most difference to. You've confessed to theft, and now he knows all about it, and he can bring it out in the inquest, and then if necessary, carry it on to court. He can't do anything to your mother and Sheila and me, except perhaps make us look a bit of ashamed of ourselves in public. But as for you, it can ruin you, you know.
We hardly ever told him anything he didn't know. Did you notice that?
That's nothing. He had a bit of information left by the girl and made a few smart guesses, but the fact remains that if we hadn't talked so much, he'd have had little to go on. And really, when I come to think of it, why you all had to go letting everything come out like that beats me.
It's all right talking like that now, but he made us confess.
He certainly didn't make me confess, as you call it. I told him quite plainly that I thought I'd done no more than duty.
Oh, Mother.
The fact is, you allowed yourself to be bluffed. Yes, bluffed.
No, really, Arthur.
No, not you, my dear, but these two. That fellow obviously didn't like us. He was prejudiced from the start, probably a socialist or some sort of a crank. He talked like one, and then instead of standing up to him, you let him bluff you into talking about your private affairs. You ought to have stood up to him.
Well, I didn't notice you standing up to him.
No, because by the time you'd admitted what you'd been taking money, what chance had I after that? I was a fool not to have insisted upon seeing him alone.
That wouldn't have worked.
Of course it wouldn't.
Really, from the way you children talk, you might be wanting to help him instead of us. Now just be quiet so your father can decide what we ought to do.
Yes, well, we'll have to do something and get to work quickly too. Now, who's this? Had I better go?
No, Edna will go. I asked her to wait up to make us some tea.
It might be Gerald coming back.
Yes, of course, I'd forgotten about him.
It's Mr. Croft.
I hope you don't mind my coming back.
No, of course not, Gerald.
I had a special reason for coming. When did that inspector go?
Only a few minutes ago. He put us all through it.
Sheila.
Well, Gerald might as well know.
Now, we needn't bother him with all that stuff.
All right. But we're all in it, up to the neck. It got worse after you left.
How did he behave?
He was frightening.
If you ask me, he behaved in a very peculiar and suspicious manner.
The rude way he spoke to Mr. Burling and me, it was quite extraordinary.
You know something? What is it?
That man wasn't a police officer.
What?
Are you certain?
I'm almost certain. That's what I came back to tell you.
Good lad. You asked about him, eh?
Yes, I met a police sergeant I know down the road. I asked him about this Inspector Gould and described the chap carefully to him. He swore there wasn't any Inspector Gould or anybody like him on the force here.
You didn't tell him?
No. I passed it off by saying I'd been having an argument with somebody. But the point is, this sergeant was dead certain that they hadn't had an inspector at all like the chap who came here.
By jingo, a fake.
Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say I couldn't imagine a real police inspector talking like that to us?
Well, you were right. There isn't such an inspector. We've been had.
I'm going to make certain of this.
What are you going to do?
Ring up the Chief Constable, Colonel Roberts.
Careful what you say, dear.
Of course. Brumley 8752. I was going to do this anyhow. I've had my suspicions all along. Colonel Roberts, please. Please, Mr. Arthur Burling here. Ah, Roberts. Burling here. Sorry to ring you up so late, but can you tell me if an Inspector Goole has joined your staff lately? Yes, Goole. Goole. A new man. Tall. Clean-shaven. I see. Yes. Well, that settles it. No, just a little argument we were having here. Good night. There's no Inspector Goole on the police. That man definitely wasn't a police inspector at all. As Gerald says, we've been had.
I felt it all the time. He never talked like one. He never even looked like one.
This makes a difference, you know. In fact, it makes all the difference.
Of course.
I suppose we're all nice people now.
If you've nothing more sensible than that to say, Sheila, you'd better keep quiet.
She's right, though.
And you'd better keep quiet anyhow, if that had been a police inspector and he'd heard you confess.
Arthur, careful.
Yes, yes.
You see, Gerald, you haven't to know the rest of our crimes and idiocies.
That's all right. I don't want to. What do you make of this business now? Was it a hoax?
Oh, of course. Somebody put that fellow up to coming here and hoaxing us. There are people in this town who dislike me enough to do that. We ought to have seen through it from the first. In the ordinary way, I believe I would have done. But coming like that, bang on top of our little celebration, just when we were all feeling so pleased with ourselves, naturally, it took me by surprise.
I wish I'd been here when that man first arrived. I'd have asked him a few questions before I allowed him to ask us any.
It's all right saying that now.
I was the only one of you who didn't give in to him. And now I say we must discuss this business quietly and sensibly and decide if there's anything to be done about it.
You're absolutely right, my dear. Already we've discovered one important fact, that the fellow was a fraud and we've been hoaxed. And that may not be the end of it by any means.
I'm sure it isn't.
You are a... Good. Eric, sit down.
I'm all right.
All right, you're anything but all right. And you need to stand there as if
What?
As if you'd done nothing to do with us. Just remember your own position, young man. If anybody's up to the neck in this business, you are. So you'd better take some interest in it.
I do take some interest in it. I take too much. That's my trouble.
It's mine too.
Now listen, you two. If you're still feeling on edge, then the least you can do is keep quiet. Leave this to us. I'll admit that this fellow's antics rattled us a bit, but we found him out, and all we have to do is keep our heads. Now it's our turn.
Our turn to do what?
To behave sensibly, Sheila, which is more than what you're doing.
What's the use of talking about behaving sensibly? You're beginning to pretend now that nothing's really happened at all. And I can't see it like that. This girl's still dead, isn't she? Nobody's brought her to life, have they?
That's just what I feel, Eric. And it's what they don't seem to understand.
Whoever that chap was, the fact remains that I did what I did. My mother did what she did. And the rest of you did what you did to her. It's still the same rotten story, whether it's been told to a police inspector or to somebody else. According to you, I ought to feel a lot better. I stole some money, Gerald. He might as well know. I don't care. Let him know. The money's not the important thing. It's what happened to the girl and what we all did to her that matters. And I still feel the same about it. And that's why I don't feel like sitting down and having a nice, cozy talk.
And Eric's absolutely right. And it's the best thing any one of us has said tonight. And he makes me feel a bit less ashamed of us. You're just beginning to pretend all over again.
Look, for God's sake.
Arthur!
Well, my dear, they're so damned exasperating. They just won't try to understand our position or to see the difference between a lot of stuff like this coming out in private and a downright public scandal.
And I say the girl's dead and we all helped to kill her. And that's what matters.
And I say either stop shouting or get out. Some fathers I know would have kicked you out this house anyhow by this time, so hold your tongue if you want to stay here.
I don't give a damn now whether I stay here or not.
You'll stay here long enough to give me an account of that money you stole, yes, and to pay it back too.
But that won't bring Eva Smith back to life, will it?
And it doesn't alter the fact that we all helped to kill her.
But is it a fact?
Of course it is. You don't know the whole story yet.
I suppose you're going to prove now you didn't spend last summer keeping this girl instead of seeing me, eh?
I did keep a girl last summer, I've admitted it. And I'm sorry, Sheila.
Well, I must admit, you came out of it better than the rest of us. The inspector said that.
He wasn't an inspector.
Well, he inspected us all right. And don't let's start dodging and pretending now, because between us, we drove that girl to commit suicide.
Did we? You say so. Because I say there's no more real evidence we did than there was that chap was a police inspector.
Well, of course there is.
No, there isn't. Look at it. A man comes here pretending to be a police officer. It's a hoax of some kind. Now, what does he do? Very artfully working on bits of information he's picked up here and there, he bluffs us into confessing that we've all been mixed up in this girl's life in one way or another.
And so we have.
But how do you know it's the same girl?
Now, wait a minute. Let's see how that would work. Now. No, it wouldn't.
We all admitted it.
All right, you all admitted something to do with the girl. But how do you know it's the same girl? Look here, Mr. Burling. You sack a girl called Eva Smith. You've forgotten. But he shows you a photograph of her, and then you remember, right?
Yes, that part's straightforward enough. But what then?
Well, then he happens to know that Sheila once had a girl sacked from Millwood shop. He tells us that it's the same Eva Smith, and he shows her a photograph that she recognises.
Oh, yes, the same photograph.
How do you know it's the same photograph? Did you see the one that your father looked at?
No, I didn't.
And did your father see the one he showed you?
No, he didn't. I see what you mean now.
We've no proof it was the same photograph, and therefore no proof it was the same girl. Now, take me. I never saw a photograph, remember? He caught me out by suddenly announcing that this girl changed her name to Daisy Renton. I gave myself away at once because I'd known a Daisy Renton.
And then there wasn't the slightest proof that this Daisy Renton was really Eva Smith. We've only his word for it. And we'd have his word for it if he was a police inspector, and we now know he was lying. So he could have been lying all the time.
Of course he could. Probably was. Now, what happened after I left?
I was upset because Eric had left the house, and this man said that if Eric didn't come back, he'd have to go and find him. Well, that made me feel worse still, and his manner was so severe and he seemed so confident. Then quite suddenly he said I'd seen Eva Smith only 2 weeks ago.
Those were his exact words.
And like a fool, I said yes, I had.
I don't see now why you did that. She didn't call herself Eva Smith when she came to see you at the committee, did she?
No, of course she didn't, but feeling so worried when he suddenly turned on me with those questions, I answered more or less as he wanted me to answer.
But Mother, don't forget that he showed you a photograph of the girl before that, and you obviously recognised it.
Did anybody else see it?
No, he showed it only to me.
Then don't you see? There's still no proof it was really the same girl. He might have showed you the photograph of any girl who applied to the committee. And how do we know she was really Eva Smith or Daisy Renton?
Gerald's dead right. He could have used a different photograph each time, and we'd be none the wiser. We may all have been recognising different girls.
Exactly. Did he ask you to identify a photograph, Eric?
No, he didn't need a photograph by the time he'd got round to me. But obviously it must have been the girl I knew who went round to see Mother.
Why must it?
She said she had to have help because she wouldn't take any more stolen money. And the girl I knew had told me that already.
Even then, that may have all been nonsense.
I don't see much nonsense about it when a girl goes and kills herself. You lot may be letting yourselves out nicely, but I can't. Nor can Mother. We did her in all right.
Wait a minute. Don't be in such a hurry to put yourself in court. That interview with your mother could have been just as much of a put-up job like all this police inspector business. The whole demand thing can have been a piece of bluff.
How can it? The girl's dead, isn't she?
What girl? There were probably 4 or 5 different girls.
It doesn't matter to me. The one I knew is dead.
Is she? How do we know she is?
That's right. You've got it. How do we know any girl killed herself today?
Now answer that one. Let's look at it from this fellow's point of view. We're having a little celebration here and feeling rather pleased with ourselves. Now, he has to work a trick on us. Well, the first thing he has to do is give us such a shock that after that he can bluff us all the time. So he starts right off. A girl has just died in the infirmary. She drank some strong disinfectant, died in agony.
All right, don't pile it on.
There you are, you see, just repeating it. Shakes you a bit. And that's what he had to do. Shake us at once and then start questioning us until we didn't know where we were. Oh, let's admit that. He had a laugh of us, all right.
He could laugh his head off if I knew it really was all a hoax.
I'm convinced it is. No police inquiry. No one girl that all this happens to. No scandal.
And no suicide?
We can settle that at once.
How?
By ringing up the infirmary. Either there's a dead girl there, or there isn't.
It will look a bit queer, won't it, ringing up at this time of night?
I don't mind doing it.
And if there isn't,
Anyway, we'll see. Bromley, 8986. Is that the infirmary? This is Mr. Gerald Croft of Croft Limited. Yes. We're rather worried about one of our employees. Have you had a girl brought up this afternoon who committed suicide by drinking disinfectant? Or any like suicide? Yes, I'll wait. Yes? You're certain of that? I see. Yep, well, thank you very much. Good night. No girl has died in there today. Nobody's been brought in after just drinking disinfectant. They haven't had a suicide for months.
There you are. Proof positive. The whole story's just a load of moonshine. Nothing but an elaborate sell. Nobody likes to be sold as badly as that. But for all that, Gerald, have a drink.
Thanks. I think I could just do with one now.
So could I.
I must say, Gerald, you've argued this very cleverly, and I'm most grateful.
Well, you see, while I was out of the house, I'd, had time to cool off and think things out a little.
Yes, he didn't keep you on the run as he did the rest of us, I'll admit now. He gave me a bit of a scare at the time, but I had a special reason for not wanting any public scandal just right now. Well, here's to us. Come on, Sheila, don't look like that. All over now.
The worst part is, but you're forgetting one thing I still can't forget. Everything we said had happened really had happened. If it didn't end tragically, then that's lucky for us. But it might have done.
But the whole thing's different now. Come, you can see that, can't you? You all helped kill her, and I wish you could have seen the look on your faces when he said that. Going to bed, young woman?
I want to get out of this. It frightens me the way you talk.
Nonsense. You'll have a good laugh over it yet. Look, you'd better ask Gerald for that ring back you gave him, hadn't you? Then you'll feel better.
You're pretending everything is just as it was before.
I'm not.
No, but these others are.
Well, isn't it? We've been had, that's all.
So nothing really happened. So there's nothing to be sorry for, nothing to learn. We can all go on behaving just as we did.
Well, why shouldn't we?
I tell you, whoever that inspector was, it was anything but a joke. You knew it then. You began to learn something. And now you've stopped. You're ready to go on in the same old way.
And you're not, eh?
No, because I remember what he said, how he looked, and what he made me feel. Fire, blood, and anguish. And it frightens me the way you talk, and I can't listen to any more of it.
And I agree with Sheila. It frightens me too.
Well, go to bed then. Don't stand there being hysterical.
They're overtired. In the morning, they'll be as amused as we are.
Everything's all right now, Sheila. What about this ring?
No, not yet. It's too soon. I must think.
Now look at the pair of them, the famous younger generation who know it all, and they can't even take a joke.
The telephone rings sharply. There is a moment's complete silence. Burling goes to answer it.
Yes, Mr. Burling speaking. What? Here?
But obviously the other person has rung off. He puts the telephone down slowly and looks in a panic-stricken fashion at the others.
That was the police. A girl has just died. On her way to the infirmary after swallowing some disinfectant. And a police inspector is on his way here to ask some questions.
As they stare, guiltily and dumbfounded, the curtain falls. End of play.
Boom, boom, boom.
Well done. Excellent. Round of applause. Okay. So, dramatic ending then to the play. They're all feeling very, very pleased with themselves. Well, not all of them. Some of them feeling very pleased with themselves, think they've got away with it. And then turns out a girl really has died and an inspector is on the way. So I think that final act raises lots and lots of questions about the identities of the two main characters, I suppose, in the play. One of them that we see on stage in The Inspector, and one who's off stage is Eva Smith. So I think, you know, there's lots of questions raised about the inspector's actual identity. Turns out he's not a police inspector, or certainly not on Colonel Roberts' force. And so we might question who he is. That might be the first thing you want to consider. Who is the inspector? And there's no answer to that. There's no correct answer. That's really your interpretation. And then the final question you might want to consider is, what do we think Priestley is trying to show or tell us? So if you're in class or you're doing this at home, now might be a good time to pause while we are going to talk through our ideas. So, well, Mr. Stanton, I'll start with you. You are the inspector.
Yes, I am.
The inspector.
Who is he, do you say? Sorry.
Yeah, who is the inspector?
Well, there's several, there's schools of thought, aren't there? The fact that he's called Ghoul is a homonym for ghoul, as in ghost. So we've also got the fact that Priestley was obsessed, wasn't he, with time and time travel and the circularity of time. So it's almost like the entire Burling clan with Gerald attached is living this hellish experience over and over again, a kind of Groundhog Day, until potentially they get it right one day. I don't know. And the one I've always liked, actually, there's no evidence for it at all, but and I don't think he is in any way, shape or form Daisy Renton's father or Eva Smith's father. But so much about the play is about different generations and about parenting and about being the child of parents and being the parent of children that you don't agree with. And we don't know who the inspector is and we don't know who the girl was. So they're almost all that's left at the end, and he speaks because she can't. Do you know what I mean? So there's a kind of, to me, there's always a kind of paternal thing there at the end. I don't think he's actually her father, but, you know what I mean, he's the voice, isn't he? Potentially the voice of the future. I mean, literally at the end, of course, because he's about to arrive and start inspecting her. But obviously written in 1945, looking back to 1912, the inspector is right, isn't he? Most of the things he says as the voice of the socialist future, as it must have looked in 1945, that we were all going to start being nice to each other and socialist to each other. Sadly, that hasn't happened, has it? You probably better mute me at this point, actually, just in case I start betraying my politics. No, but I think he's an agent, isn't he? He's an agent to expose the family. I think Sheila and Eric get that, and the others don't.
And I think the fire and blood and anguish, you know, that very famous quote from Inspector Calls, and the final words really of the inspector's closing speech, when he says, if men will not learn this lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Well, there's a number of events you could pick from the intervening 30 years between when an Inspector Calls was set and when it was written. You know, you could look at the Russian Revolution, you could look at either of the world wars that happened, and seeing that as I suppose almost a metaphor for the punishment of the sins of man. And I think there's a lot of religious connotations that we can consider when we look at Inspector Calls. I mean, I've seen one theory that the different characters are embodiments of the deadly sins. Mrs. Birling, for example, being the
Pride.
of pride. Yeah.
That's clever. I like that.
And so I think, yeah, there's definitely something we could consider. And we see the characters falling into two distinct camps, really, I think, in this scene, and thought that was really played out well by you all. Mr. Fitzgerald was just incredulous as Eric, and Mrs. Salguero as well as Sheila, who say it doesn't really matter who the inspector is because we still all did something wrong and we need to accept responsibility. And I suppose it goes back to what we talked about in Act 1 with Birling's obsession with status. If this inspector has no status, then he's not a threat to him. And his, knighthood and public scandal. And I think as an audience, we're disgusted with Birling, that is still his priority, that's still his focus.
I think as well as a director, we think about it as a play, and therefore it's characters on a stage. And there's that lovely moment, almost the last thing that Birling says before the phone call comes, where he is obviously pointing at Sheila and Eric. This is the famous younger generation who know it all. And clearly the two siblings are obviously standing together. And in some way, the two parents have backed away. So there's almost this kind of divide on stage so that he can actually point across the stage and say, it's not like Sheila's standing behind him and Eric's standing in front of him. They're obviously together and apart from their parents. So there's a nice visual representation, really, of the way that particular younger generation is going to break away from its parents. And as always, actually, the rogue element is Gerald, isn't it? Where is he standing? He's close enough to Sheila to be offering her the ring, isn't he? But obviously, the older Birlings don't include him as part of the younger generation because he's the one who's punctured the whole thing, isn't he? He's the one who's worked it out. And he, again, seems like he's not bothered.
And going back to your point about staging, at the beginning of the play, Sheila sat next to Gerald opposite Eric, and Eric sort of sat on his own. And they are sort of in, they're in literal opposition, but they're also in conflict with each other. They squabble and they bicker. These are two siblings in their 20s and they're squabbling like they're kids. And by the end of the play, they're actually united. They present a united front against their parents. And I think Gerald, by the end of the play, I really don't like Gerald. I wasn't hugely keen on him in Act 2, but by Act 3, I really dislike him, and I think that's because he, I always sort of read it that he went out for this walk to, have some time maybe to grieve for Daisy Renton. Actually, he's been spending his time trying to gather evidence that discredits the inspector. Mr. Green, you're Gerald. Is there anything you can maybe add about your character there? How do you feel about Gerald?
Well, just perhaps he's kind of going back to the idea of him being from this different class. He's like rooted perhaps in the establishment. His parents have got titles. He's grown up in this privileged existence, and perhaps he doesn't see the reality that someone like people like Sheila and Eric do, that are further down the class scale. That might suggest that there's some hope perhaps for the middle classes or the emerging middle classes that they can be kinder, that they can be better perhaps than people like Mrs. Birling or other characters. And I wonder whether as well, that if you think about Priestley, he fought in World War One. His father was a respectable family. His father was a head teacher. He then went to Cambridge. I wonder whether there's a mesh of all these different people that he's seen throughout his life and his experiences. Someone like Eric or Spectre, maybe both of them are Priestley in some way. Maybe a bit of the anger from the the war and the way in which perhaps some people viewed the war, especially during World War One, and then maybe with Eric, that kind of, you can see the kind of socialist perspective coming through Eric a little bit towards the end. So maybe those two characters more than any other are Priestley's mouthpiece.
I see Sheila as really taking over as the role of the inspector is Priestley's mouthpiece for the end of the play, and I often see Sheila by the end of the play as the hero. And Miss Ormonde talked about earlier that maybe Birling is the one sat in the audience, in the 1940s. I always see Sheila as possibly the only survivor in 1945, 1946. The Mr. and Mrs. Birling, they're in the 50s in 1912, may or may not be with us in the 1940s, like Mr.
Yes,
Stanton.
Birling likes a cigar, doesn't he? And lots of drink, and he's pretty heavy, so possibly not.
Gerald and Eric, like Mr. Stanton said, possibly sort of met their maker in World War One. Actually, Sheila may be the only voice that we're still hearing in the 40s, and ironically, a voice that is other characters attempt to silence constantly throughout the play, and by the end of the play, for me, Sheila is the hero of it, and I think that is because she's Priestley's hope.
There is a bit of it, though, like, although she does redeem herself back by the end, there is like a part of her that is, she figures out what the inspector's doing, and he's almost encouraging the others to stop speaking. Can't you see what he's doing? Like she tries to silence almost the truth coming out earlier on. I mean, she changes towards the end where she has like outright condemnation, but Eric seems to be earlier on a little bit more in tune with that than maybe Sheila does, and Sheila does try. She has those moments, like especially to her mother, where she's like, "Can't you see what he's doing? Like, just don't say anything else."
She's so like she's so conditioned to doing what she's told as well. I mean, she's still like trying to not so much protect her mum, but she's only just coming out of that sort of really childlike position that she's been in, and it would be a bit unrealistic if she just suddenly sort of started talking back to her parents straight away. She kind of comes to that gradually, doesn't she, the more the play goes on.
Biggest turning point, doesn't she, out of everybody?
Yeah. Whereas Eric's already like in opposition to his family at the beginning, really the black sheep and the outside. More naturally to him to kind of speak against them, whereas she was like the golden girl, isn't she, on the inside? You get this her like realizing like something at the same time, and the women who would have been, like Sheila would have been in the workplace and would probably to be displaced by men returning from war. And it was politically probably a large part of the audience that Priestley was speaking to, women who were able to actually have a say and have change.
Yeah, I think I think we've probably answered this final question. What do we think Priestley is trying to show or tell us? I think the word Miss Ormonde used there, change. I think this is really this play as a whole, as well as some of the characters in it, is a agent for change. And as Mr. Stanton's mentioned, a change that maybe hasn't wholly or even partially been realised, even by 2020. But ideas, I think, that are still very prevalent in today's society as well. Those ideas of inequality, and the have and the have-nots, and fairness, I think, are still things that are relevant to today's society, even though this play now is almost 80 years old.
And people like Gerald, who are not like the obvious villains, but are quite happy to kind of like shut up and cover up if it suits them. So that kind of silence being a form of oppression, that's Gerald all over, isn't it, really?
I think as well, like this period is when you start to get almost a new period, or within a couple of decades of like modernism, postmodernism, and the theatre of the absurd, which is focuses on, I guess, our existence in some way. You get plays like that after World War II, and there's that element of, not massively, but isn't it, the element of the theatre of the absurd attached to the Inspector, and those kind of plays get us to look at our existence. What is it that we're here for? And he's kind of, I guess, offering some sort of message there about our existence, isn't it? And how we behave, how we treat each other.
Yeah. I think that's a really nice note to leave it on as well, actually. If there's anything we can take from this play is to reflect on how we behave, how we treat each other. And I think Priestley would be very happy that that's what we've come out with 80 years after he wrote it. So I hope that was useful. Hope you've enjoyed that. Plenty there to discuss. And I'm sure there'll be lots more to discuss in your lessons on an Inspector Calls. So thank you very much. And that's bye from us.
Bye.
Bye.